All right. Once again, good morning and welcome to another session on alternatives to school-based education. And for today, we will be discussing SDGs, ESD, and alternatives in education. So let me preface my discussion by way of definition as to what sustainable development is all about. Okay. In a convention, okay, which is dubbed as Brundtland WCED. Okay. A definition was introduced to capture the very essence of sustainable development. And according to this definition, sustainable development is that which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability to future generations to meet their own needs. So basically, that's all about sustainability. Sustainability is ensuring that the future generations will enjoy from the same benefits that we are currently enjoying. Okay, in order for them to be able to realize their fullest potentials, and in order for them to be able to optimize their existence. So the sustainability model is a challenge to conventional forms of development. I know that you have had part of your readings, the top-down, the bottom-up models and the like, which were introduced prior to the sustainability model. And all of this were introduced sometime in the 1950s to the 1960s, 60s, 70s. So this is a challenge to most conventional forms of development, and where this model seeks to reconcile the ecological, social, and economic dimensions of development now and into the future. So I'd like to point it out. So it's basically to reconcile ecological, meaning the planet, social, the people, and economic, profit. Okay, so we talk about people, planet, and profit. So this is the so-called triple bottom line. Okay, and acknowledging biophysical limits to growth and prices the preservation of ecosystem services, which have been in the course of pursuing development, okay, have been misused or worse, abused. Okay, so the sustainability model is an agenda of social justice within and across current and future generations. So time and again, we're talking about having to afford the future generation the same resources, the same benefits that we are currently enjoying as a generation. So as mentioned earlier, sustainable development encapsulates three elements. We have social equity, we have economic prosperity, and environmental stewardship. And you get to see the cross-section of the different elements. Okay? We talk in terms of equitability. Okay? We have bearability and viability. Okay? And the intersection of these three, okay, points out on what is regarded as sustainable development. Meaning that for it to be a sustainable development, it has to be equitable, it has to be bearable, and finally, it has to be viable. On that note, so let's take a look at the spheres of sustainability. Okay, and if we are to have a definite understanding of what the sustainable development model would center on, based on the three critical elements that I have mentioned. We talk about sustainability, sustainable development as number one, dealing with, of course, natural resource use and environmental protection for environmental aspect. We talk about cultural identity, social inclusion, and civil rights for social aspect. Okay, and then we also talk about wealth creation and property plus employment in economic aspects. Okay, so these are the three spheres of development. Okay, so we also take a look at Hold on for a second. So we have the intersection of the three critical elements: the social, environmental. We also have social and economic, and environmental and economic. So, meaning that the concept of sustainable development is also advocating for what we call as interdependence. So we do not expect that environmental concerns should be treated alone. It has to be also in connection with the other important, equally important elements. So just like, for example, the cross-section between social and environmental, where we talk about environmental justice, we talk about natural resources stewardship, okay? And then we also have it in terms of social economic. You know, when we talk about, say, for example, health in relation to the availability of resources to attend to our health needs and educational needs, for example. And then we have environmental economic on energy efficiency, incentives for use of natural resources. So this is all about sustainable development. And in more specific terms, sustainable development is translated into 17 goals. Okay? And the precursor of the 17 set of goals actually is the Millennium Development Goals. Okay? I think you are also familiar with that. Okay? The precursor of SDG, as I have mentioned, is the MDG. Okay? Millennium Development Goals. Why Millennium Development Goals? Because at the time when the leaders of the nations, okay, across the globe, you know, have been posed with critical and alarming problem of the world, where they have identified what is the most common concern to all nations, and they all agree that it's all about poverty. But at the time when they were deliberating on how to address poverty, the member nations of the United Nations, okay, realize that it's not only poverty that should be given the central focus of the concerted action by the many nations of the world, but to have it in more specific goals, and that led them to the identification of the Millennium Development Goals. So why Millennium Development? Because the set of development goals were introduced the turn of the new millennium, 2000, and they thought of having to implement it for 15 years. So that's for 2000 to 2015, which is why the Sustainable Development Goals was introduced in order to continue, okay, the thrust, okay, the unfinished business, so to speak, of the Millennium Development Goals. By the way, I'd like to know who among you have read about Millennium Development Goals. A show of hands, please. A show of hands, please. Maybe you can click the raise hand button so I get to see it. Can you hear me? Can you please can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes,
Alright,
sir.
okay.
We can hear you.
So
Yes, sir.
I suppose that you have not read about Millennium Development Goals. Tama po ba?
Yes, sir.
All right. So maybe if you have time, you can check it in the Google. Okay, it's the earliest beginnings of the SDGs. So as mentioned to you, the Millennium Development Goals was implemented 2000 to 2015, and when the term expired, it was survived by the Sustainable Development Goals. So from the 10 Millennium Development Goals, okay, it was increased to about to 17, okay, as follows. Okay, so we have the set of 17 goals to deal with. But I'm not going to talk about all. Okay, I'm only to focus my attention on what is concerning education and other concerns that relate to education. But before we do so, let's bring our attention to what these 17 goals are. So just a run through. Okay. So number one is end poverty in all its forms everywhere. See, the number one priority is eradication of poverty. Okay. So this is in recognition of the fact that the nations of the world, you know, agree that poverty is the main problem that the world is currently facing. Okay, so end poverty in all its form everywhere. Number two, end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Number three, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all, at least all ages. Take note of the terms all, because sustainable development goals is also for inclusivity. Okay, so it promotes inclusivity, inclusive sustainable development. That is number four. Okay, you see, one of the more significant aspects of the SDGs, the fact that a specific goal, okay, addresses education. Okay, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So we're talking about not only basic education, we're not only talking about higher education or technical education, we're also talking about lifelong learning opportunities. So we can also have it part of the discussion of goal number 4, andragogy, you know, which is adult education, okay, and other forms of education other than the more formal ones, which will include, of course, alternative education. Number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, and up to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Okay, so these are the sets of 17 goals. Now, this is what I was referring to you earlier, the Millennium Development Goals, which were implemented from 2000 to 2015. It's a 15-year period. And if you will take a look at how the implementation was observed, it was primarily focusing on developing countries. Secondly, it's more of social goals that were given much of attention, and assistance, okay, is very critical, you know, in the course of implementing the set of goals. Okay, and it was pointed out in a study that the data were static and multi-year lags were noted. Okay, so meaning the attainment of the goals were far, okay, from what were set for standards or targets, I should say. And of course, focus is also placed on the critical role played by the government and the policymakers, you know, because it's understandable, because as this was the first, you know, time to be introduced, you know, with development goals under the principle of sustainability or sustainable development, there ought to be in place a institutional guidelines or policies that would ensure, okay, that the initiatives, okay, are well entrenched in the system. Okay, so that's how Millennium Development Goals for 15 years were carried out. Now comes the global goals, which is currently implemented up until 2030 for the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. It has become more universal. Okay, again, we're talking about inclusivity. We're talking about having to strike the balance between the three important pillars of development. We have social, economic, and environmental. We also talk about in sustaining our efforts. We talk about investment. We talk about assistance. We talk about PPPs, or private public partnerships. Okay, and this time we are aiming for more real-time and dynamic data. Okay, of course, with the ubiquity of the use of the internet and other related technology. Okay, maybe you have heard of data science and big data and all. Okay, that the gathering and analysis of data has become, okay, exponentially increase, okay, in terms of real-time accession and all. And of course, it is for everyone, not only addressing a specific sector. Okay. Now, so if we are to analyze further how it was for MDG and now for the SDG in terms of the process, the goals, the baseline, okay, the funding. Okay, so this is how we compare the SDG and the MDG. Okay, so as the process, okay, it was very exclusive, and only group of experts were very much involved in the MDG. But when SDGs were introduced, it called for inclusivity. Okay, we are actually talking about 70 OWG. We have civil society or organizations. We have thematic consultation. We have country consultation. We have public, online, D2D, and others that would describe the very dynamic process that's involved in the SDG. Okay, as to goals, yeah, I beg to correct my statement earlier. It's set of 8 goals with 21 targets, 63 indicators for the MDG. While for the SDG, we have 17 goals and 169 targets with indicators. Okay, so that's how it expanded to 169 targets from the 21 targets aimed at in the implementation of the MDG. Okay, so the funding, of course, is from everyone: countries, banks, international agencies, private partners, etc. Okay, but in the case of MDG, it's from developed countries assisting the more inferior ones. Okay, and then as to pillars, there's no such inclusion. Okay, I would like to point it out again. While in the SDG, there's very much inclusivity incorporated, integrated in the set of 17 goals. Okay, so the role of CSO, CSO stands for civil society organizations. So now they have a pivotal role to play. They frame and implement, and they form pressure group for accountability on the government. Okay, and as to education, we in the SDG talk about quality and quantity of education. In the MDG, only focus on quantity. Now it's giving more relevance to education because we talk about quality, not only quantity in the SDG. Okay, so that's in terms of the comparison. Okay, so just a historical review of how it came to be. In addition to what I have mentioned, in 2001, group of experts in the UN Secretary selected 18 targets from September 2000, Millennium Development, grouped them into 8 goals. Okay, so these are the set of 8 goals, the precursor of what is now the 17. Okay, so the objective was to reshape UN development agenda. Okay, so again, it is clear to note that the purpose of why Millennium Development Goal was introduced was to reshape a UN development agenda. So it's accepted by all heads of the state at the Millennium Summit. Okay, at the Millennium Summit, the heads of the nations, under the United Nations, they convene and to agree to reshape the UN development agenda by focusing on 8 goals around poverty reduction and other social goals. Okay, but lowering ambition of declaration and existing goals from the UN mega conferences in the 1990s. So here comes now the SDG, the outcome document of 2010 MDG Summit, requested by Secretary General to initiate thinking on the global development agenda beyond 2015. 2010 was the so-called midterm, okay, midterm evaluation, midterm review. So there was a midterm review. So halfway, okay, they convene again in a conference at Rio in Rio de Janeiro, okay, in 2012, where member states decided to elaborate new post-2015 Sustainable Development Framework, which gave rise to, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so what's new with the SDG? Okay, so pointing out on the previous slide that we have analyzed earlier. Okay, so SDGs, okay, now is universal. It's for all countries. It's negotiated by member states with stronger country ownership, and it's intergovernmentally negotiated global architecture monitoring system being shaped. Okay, so the means of implementation has become more, okay, institutionalized. So to reiterate, okay, the aims of the Sustainable Development Goal is to lay out a new roadmap, that is to improve the lives of people throughout the world by 2030. Okay, so it's clear, to improve the lives of the people throughout the world by 2030, and education is part and parcel of the set of 17. So this is now the timeline. So the development goals timeline. Okay, so we started sometime in 1994, and moving forward to indicators to measure SDG progress is scheduled last March midway 2016 and 2017. So this is how we account for the development of the development goals, okay, from what has become the earliest beginnings of the so-called development goals in the International Conference on Population and Development Program of Action, and which paved the way, of course, for more serious talks about the development goals with the adoption of the MDG in the year 2000. And of course, now we have the development, the global goals, okay, also referred to as the SDGs. Okay, so here are now the 5 pillars that make up the Sustainable Development Framework. Okay, so we have expanded from the 3 fundamental elements as people, planet, and profit or prosperity. We have now partnership and peace. So all people. Okay, we talk about ending poverty and hunger in all forms and ensuring dignity and equality. Okay, so that's insofar as the target, addressing the people is concerned. As to planet, protecting our planet's natural resources and climate for future generations. Okay, I know that you are well aware of the current condition and the status of the resources, okay, which have been over the years, okay, misused and overused, abused, okay, because of the lack of foresight. Okay. And for prosperity, ensuring prosperous and fulfilling lives in harmony with nature. So it is bringing to the realization of everyone that for the what do you call this? For the people of the world to be able to attain prosperity, they have to be living, okay, harmoniously with the nature. Okay. So that's prosperity. Then comes a partnership, implementing the agenda through a solid global partnership. And finally, we have peace, fostering peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Okay. So here's in summary what we have identified earlier. So with emphasis on goal number 4, ensuring inclusive and quality education for all, EFA. Okay? So that's what EFA means, education for all and promote lifelong learning. So let's focus our attention on global goal number 4, okay, quality education as SDG. So we have ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So here are the targets. I don't know if it's coming in so clear to you, but I see pixelated photo. Sorry about that. So you have target 1 to target yeah. So we have pre-primary and secondary education, equal access to quality pre-primary education. We have equal access to affordable technical, vocational, and higher education. Increase the number of people with relevant skills for financial success. Eliminate all discrimination in education. Universal literacy and numeracy. We have education for sustainable development and cultural development. Build and upgrade inclusive and safe schools. Expand higher education scholarships for developing countries. And we have increased the supply of qualified teachers in developing countries. So allow me to account for you the situation. Okay, so before the onslaught of the infamous pandemic, projections showed that more than 200 billion children would be out of school. So this projection, okay, came prior to the crisis, okay, the coronavirus crisis. So even before the pandemic, okay, it was already projected that more than 200 million would be out of school. And only 60% of young people would be completing upper secondary education in 2030. So that's the grim reality based on the projection. Okay? So also before the coronavirus crisis, the proportion of children and the youth out of primary and secondary school, okay, had declined from 26% in 2000 to 19% in 2000 and 17% in 2018. Are we supposed to be happy about it? Okay. Well, let's take a look at how, okay, it is on a country basis, okay, country to country basis. While in general, okay, we delight in the thought that the number of the out of school youth has declined over the years. We will still need to address that 17% or lower, perhaps, okay, in today's time. So more than half of children that have not enrolled in school live in sub-Saharan Africa, and more than 85% of children in the sub-Saharan Africa are not learning the minimum. So we pity actually the children of Africa for in general, they have been hit, hardest hit by the underdevelopment in the region. $617 million youth worldwide lack basic mathematics and literacy skills. Some 750 million adults, that's 2/3 of them are women, remain illiterate in 2016. You see, in the Philippines, we are so lucky, okay? Because the opportunities, okay, for both men and women are equal, are almost equal, if not equal. Unlike in the other parts of the world where the males are given greater priorities, okay, than women. Okay? And as a matter of fact, our rich political history can attest to the fact that there is equality between men and women, as we have already produced, okay, thus far, okay, 2 lady presidents, okay, and this is something that we can be proud of in terms of in terms of equality between men and women, because it is very much observed, not only in so far as social education is concerned, but also in political affairs. Right? So half of the global illiterate population lives in South Asia, which actually will include the Philippines, because we are in the Southeast Asian region, and a quarter live in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so later on, I will also be mentioning about ASEAN. Okay, if you have heard of ASEAN economic integration or ASEAN economic integration, as ASEAN spelled as ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nation, which consists of 10 of the 11 nations in the Southeast Asian region. So meaning all except one is part of what is now referred to as ASEAN, all except Timor-Leste or East Timor. Okay, so in 10 low and middle income countries, children with disabilities were 19% less likely to achieve minimum proficiency in reading than those without disabilities. Again, we are promoting inclusivity. Okay, so therefore, we would also be addressing children with specific needs, children with disabilities. Okay, insofar as education is concerned. So 4 million refugee children were out of school in 2017. So by 2030, the targets, of course, and so far as Sustainable Development Goal number 4 is to ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and goal 4 effective learning outcomes. Okay, so by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development. So we're talking about pre-basic education. Okay, in the case of the Philippines, we're talking about kinder. Okay, as a way to comply with this requirement, which is why the passage of Republic Act 10533, not 101, 10533, or the new educational educational system, K-12 for the Philippines was what do you call this? The implementation of the new system came prior the passage of the law that guarantees the implementation of which I think is not usual, because in most cases, prior to the implementation of something, there has to be a legal basis. There has to be a mandate that would guarantee, or that would mandate its implementation. Okay, so unlike in the case of the K-12, the pilot came before the passage of Republic Act 10533. Okay, this is to ensure that the Philippines, a signatory nation in the United Nations, will be able to meet the requirements as prescribed by the MDG before, and now the SDG, and of course the ASEAN qualification, the ASEAN economic integration movement. Okay, so that's a backstory right there. Okay, so so that's all about the addition of K. That's why in total we have 13 years, for basic education, if we will add up to the 12 kindergarten. That's why it's termed as K to 12. Okay, because at the time when prior rather to the implementation of the K to 12, Philippines was the only country plus one, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's Aruba, that is implementing lower than 12 years of basic education. Okay, so in order for the Philippines to be able to meet the requirements of regional networks and the global network that we now are currently observing, we will need to to reformat our educational system into making it something that is meeting the international standards in terms of the number of years spent, okay, by a child in basic education. Okay, so that's the backstory right there. So by 2030, ensure equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. By 2030, substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. Which is why, if you will take a look at the new K-12 system, it promises three things. What are these three? Number one is college readiness. Number two, entrepreneurial spirit. And number three, entrepreneurial spirit. And then we have relevant skills, if I'm not mistaken, relevant skills. Okay, so that's in terms of the K-12 of the Philippines. So by 2030, eliminate gender disparity. So we're talking about gender and development here. Okay, that's in education, and ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, indigenous people, and children in vulnerable situations. Okay, we're talking about persons, okay, with different needs. We have IPs, indigenous people, and then of course we have children in vulnerable situations. Remember the cases of the refugees. Okay, so we need to address them all. Okay, based on the principle of inclusivity. By 2030, ensure that all youth, okay, all the youth, okay, and a substantial proportion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. Okay. By 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Okay, so it's all there. Okay, for the different advocacies like sustainable lifestyle, human rights promotion, gender and development, okay, creation of culture of peace and non-violence. Okay, we have global citizenship in general, and of course appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So it's promoting culture. So as we are observing multiculturalism across the world, even in the Philippines, including University of Luzon, where we host to certain international students, we are opening our doors to different culture, and in a way we are being influenced and we get to influence them, and that makes it dynamic for the multiculturalism that's taking place in the different parts of the world, including our own University of Luzon. Build and upgrade education facilities that are child, disability, and gender sensitive, and provide safe, non-violent, inclusive, and effective learning environments for all. Remember one time when the Department of Education, as a result of one incident, okay, I think that was in Mindanao, when a municipality in Mindanao was under political strife. Okay, the Department of Education circularized a memorandum for making all basic educational institutions across the archipelago as a peace zone, so that even in cases of war, the warring parties will not have part of the the uh, yeah the war, okay, the basic educational institutions. Okay, so it's building and upgrading educational facilities that are child, disability, and gender sensitive and provide safe, non-violent, inclusive, and effective learning environments for all. Okay, so by 2020, substantially expand globally the number of scholarships available to developing countries, in particular least developed countries, small island developing states, and African countries for enrollment in higher education, including vocational training and information and communications technology, technical engineering, and scientific programs in developed countries and other developing countries. By 2030, substantially increase the supply of qualified teachers. Again, the quality of education will also depend to a great extent on the quality of teachers, which is why we need to also give much of attention to the training of our teachers in order for them to be able to meet, okay, the stringent requirements of quality teaching, okay, in our educational institutions, including thorough international cooperation, including through international cooperation for teacher training in developing countries, especially least developed countries and small island developing states. Okay, so that's for the SDG. Now, in an article which I have digested for the work of Kopnina in 2020, okay, allow me to account for you what the limitations and alternatives are for the ESD goals, okay, the education for sustainable development. Okay. So in the words of Black in 2017, the purpose of education was captured in the following lines. Just as non-Christian societies have been seen by missionaries as heathen rather than as having different but valid spiritual beliefs, societies that lack schools are often seen not as having different but valid modes of knowledge and learning, but as uneducated and illiterate. And just as the salvation of indigenous people has often historically been the companion of conquest, the education of indigenous people is often an integral part of planned programs of economic development and resource extraction on indigenous lands. That, I guess, would capture the very essence of education. Okay, so that they be included in the programs of economic development and resource extraction, okay, for it to be able to for the education to fully meet the requirements of its raison d'etre, the purposes and intents. So allow me to share to you what the Western education and knowledge has contributed to the discussions on education across the globe. So this is how Western education and knowledge is observed. Okay, so it is superior. Okay, that the developed nations have evolved to a higher level of being, and that these people, however lovely they are, they're going to benefit from this superior knowledge. This is according to Norberg Hodge in the work of Black in 2010 mentioned. And this is all about cognitive imperialism. So we're talking about superiority, imperialism of the Western knowledge, okay, over the others. Okay. So that's what the history is telling us, that the Westerners are far better off in education than the rest of the world. That's what cognitive imperialism is all about. So to discuss it further, it's the process through which education is used to validate certain forms of cognition, addressing the knowledge, a generation, and to simultaneously devalue others, okay, that represent alternative perception and spiritual understanding, which for millennia, okay, or over the years have guided human relationships to the nature, to the natural world. This is according to Batiste in 1998. Therefore, it refers to schools set up by missionaries, okay, or Western development agencies, oftentimes destroying biocultural diversity. Okay. if you will recall, in the Philippine history, next to the Spaniards, are the American is the American occupation that laid the foundation of American education in the Philippines. Okay, so this brings now to the fore the concept of what is regarded as a traditional thought of education, okay, implying a thing from the past is what traditional means, and learning is seen as a backward. Western education and the desire to get a good job is perceived as modern and superior. Okay. So again, this appeals to what I have mentioned for cognitive imperialism. So from an anthropological and historical point of view, traditional cultures are not failed attempts at being us. They are unique answers to the fundamental question, what does it mean to be human and alive? So this was Black quoting Davis in 2010. So now how do we have this to leverage, okay, to serve as leverage for discussion about education for sustainable development and education sustainable development goals. Okay, so to start with, we're talking about inclusive economic growth or sustainable use, okay, where inclusion means one single species, okay, according to Kopnina and Chernak in 2016, as non-human beings and their habitats do not profit from economic growth or industrial development. So discussing further sustainability, okay, versus sustainable development, we talk about sustainable development as having to refer to wanting to sustain industrial and economic development. Okay, so this was pointed out by Kopnina and Measures in 2014 and agreed by Washington in his work in 2018. The triple objective, which I introduced to you earlier in the intro, people, planet, profit, okay, tends to see people as separate from profit, thus creating a double way to counterbalance planet. But if you will recall the illustration that I have presented to you to best represent sustainable development, it's just striking the balance and interconnection between and among the three. And but the actual observation, it tells us otherwise, where people is separated from profit, and therefore doubling the weight to counterbalance the planet. So by contrast, the concept of environmental sustainability takes the planet as a basic necessity that supports both people and profit. Remember, we have this understanding that the base of the actions of the people and any economic activity will depend to a great extent on the environmental sustainability thing. Okay? This is according to Washington in 2015. So the planet also contains billions of non-human species, okay, whose survival has a very different moral imperative than profit. So therefore, taking it in the context of the SDGs, okay, it focuses on sustainable industrial development. Okay, take note of that. Sustainable industrial development that remains disconnected from a critical realization that one cannot have the cake and eat it too. Okay? So that's how we have the analogy of it to cake and eating the cake. Okay? So where sustainability of the current industrial system is at least in the short term possible. Okay? So this is based on the work of Christ in 2012. Okay? So civilization at work, prospecting, expanding, and diversifying the resource base is also increasingly engaged in the parallel work of correcting the side effects of its excesses. Remember, we're talking about having to benefit from the resources and yet taking note of on how we can have the activities that relate to the extraction of the resources from the bounties of the nature, okay, be conserved and be preserved. Okay. So the Brundtland type definitions of sustainable development, remember the very definition that we have had for the start of the discussion, reflects highly anthropocentric and economic motives that lead to nature being essentially as a resource. Okay? Remember that in the definition, we regard, okay, nature, okay, as essentially a resource. Okay? So it is precisely the human needs and wants, particularly the economic growth and industrial development, that are immoral towards the rest of the species. Okay, so this is how we have it now explained, as through as to the anthropocentric, development, and looking into the stages of the Anthropocene from from uh, from the prehistoric times to the present times. Okay, so pre-Anthropocene events, we talk about fire stick farming. We talk about the extinction of the large fauna. Okay, like for example, we talk about the extinction of the dinosaurs, okay, and the large creatures. We have early forest clearing. Okay. And then came the Anthropocene stage, circa 1800 to 1945. We have internal combustion engine, because that's where we have witnessed the so-called Industrial Revolution. Remember that? Okay, fossil fuel energy was introduced, and of course, the introduction of science and technology. And then we have Anthropocene stage 2, 1945, 2010. Or 2020, the Great Acceleration, where new institutions and vast global networks are observed. And then we have the future. So we have the so-called Great Transition. Okay. So what does development changes mean over time? So it all started with colonial exploitation. We are also witnesses to this as a nation. Okay. And led us to Rostov's stages of growth, then the dependency school, okay, and then we have the trickle-down development with equity. The trickle-down talks about um, from the top to the bottom. Okay, so just like if we are to view the structure of the society, it is in the pyramid style, where the concentration of the wealth is in the apex, and which will now be trickled down below. But that did not necessarily happen, okay, because you get to see that the dynamics, over time, even up to this point in time, is where the rich becomes richer while the poor becomes poorer. Okay, and then we have the neoliberalism. Now, the transition shift now is from the hunter to the gatherer society to agrarian. Remember, agriculture has become one of the major activities that we have had prior the introduction of industries, and then now we have the so-called sustainable development. So, how do we sum it all up now for the SDG, for its meaning? So, the most common application for sustainable development is striking the balance between and among the three important critical elements. Okay, and it's not only anthropocentric, but also counterproductive in educating future planetary citizens. Excuse me. Okay, so in its designation as quality education, okay, ESDG might negate environmental sustainability. Okay. So universal education as a positive force, and these are actually better alternatives that are put across as recommendation. and opinions and commentaries. Okay. For example, not all Western education needs to be criticized offhand as economy-centered, neo-colonial, or hegemonic. Some types of education can be much more so. Okay. We also talk, aside from Western education, the Islamic education, which embraces basic numeracy and literacy, okay, including wider values and eco-ethics, according to Muhammad in 2014. So the more strict or militant pure education promotes intolerance towards other cultures, religions, and ways of life. Okay. That's based on the work of Voss in 2019. So inspired by critical pedagogy, remember critical pedagogy as pointed out in the article that we have reviewed, and based on the discussion that I delivered to the class the last time, which actually was developed by Paulo Freire, okay, in his seminal text, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So the interrelated fields of eco-pedagogy and eco-literacy were to empower disenfranchised students. That's by taking control of their own lives, okay, in face of oppressive power holders. Allow me to give examples. Like if there are non-conformants, okay, meaning students that have been violating school rules, they are subjected to, say, for example, disciplinary measures, where they're under the control of someone. And understanding of one's position within the community through active participation and engagement. So how do we link it all together for critical pedagogy, eco-literacy, and eco-pedagogy? Okay, so in the SDG frame, society and economy-centered sustainability, the impact on the oppressed non-human species is forgotten. Okay? We might have given much of focus, okay, to the human species, okay, to the human beings, but must have remissed of our responsibility to the non-human species. So what is the maximal number of people that the earth can provide resources for without severely degrading those resources for future people? So if we don't put the stop to the abuses that we do to the nature, okay, we might end up, okay, in a very disadvantaged stance in the near future. So how many people and at what level of consumption can live on Earth without turning the Earth into a human colony founded on the genocide of its non-human indigents? Okay. So of course, we fear that the extinction of the non-human species because of the responsibility of the people on top of the earth. Okay. So moreover, this pedagogy, okay, results not just in emancipatory learning, okay, not only all about becoming free, okay, becoming what do you call this, becoming dependent, okay, after having gone through the process of learning, but also in the task of realizing ethical and pragmatic aspects of what development means for billions of other species. Okay. So this emancipation, okay, when you talk about emancipation, it's attaining freedom, okay, inspired by civil rights liberation movements. Maybe you are familiar with the liberation of slaves, granting voting rights to women and even minorities. Okay. So that's not only all about okay, critical pedagogy, the concept of emancipation inspired by the civil rights and others. It is not the radicalism of the movement, okay, that needs to be criticized, but a society that indeed labels movements that defend nature as terrorist organization. So we must have a reverse of our mindset into treating nature as coexistent in this world. Education inspired by critical pedagogy, eco-literacy, and eco-pedagogy, while not at all supporting the strategy of economic sabotage employed by ELF or Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front, draws its inspiration from ideals that drive these people. So it's intertwining, the giving of attention not only to education but to education of the human beings, but also taking into consideration the critical role played by the non-human species, part and parcel of the process. So it is not so as part of a future-oriented political and legal vision rooted in ecocentrism that radically opposes the globalization of ideologies such as colonialism, neoliberal economy, and imperialism, also discussed by Black in 2010 and 2017. So these are types of education that attempt to foment and an understanding of the current environmental predicament, as well as the motivation and and tools to actively address these challenges. Okay, so this education is founded on cultural democracy, indigenous sovereignty, human rights, and respect for all life. Okay. So equally far from ESDG is education that takes a complex interplay and intricate entanglements between social and environmental system as a starting point. So where indigenous knowledge with its integration of the material and spiritual domains with interdependent culture and other forms of life is not seen in the current education of sustainable development. In a certain sense, traditional education for all used to exist in all localities. Okay. So similar to eco-pedagogy is the concept of eco-literacy, which is also referred to as ecological literacy. This was developed by David Orr in 1994 that puts premium to the ability of learners to understand basic facts about the environment and ecosystem functions, which is why some of the alternative schools that we have identified in part of the list of the types of alternative schools would have for central themes the environment or ecology for that matter. So eco-literacy involves appreciating the principles of ecological community organization and uses those principles for creating sustainable societies. So again, stemming from the pedagogy of this oppressed in a work authored by Paulo Freire. Okay, another alternative is an admittedly more Western type of education that can be described as emancipation or empowerment education. Remember also, for those who were born, may I say the Generation X have been witnesses to what we call as empowerment. So before the term sustainability or sustainable development, we had empowerment as the byword of almost all development enthusiasts and development practitioners. Okay, so that also gave rise to what is now referred to as empowerment education or emancipation in education. So where this education is rooted in empowerment theory, exploring relationships between individuals within specific social, organizational, political, and significantly in educational environments. Okay. So based on this concept of emancipation or empowerment education, okay, where empowerment is applied to areas concerned with sustainability or nature protection, intentional education for sustainability can be seen as an enabling process targeting student abilities or competencies such as self-determination, self-efficacy, motivation, and active engagement. which is in line with the early ideals of the Belgrade Charter. Okay. So empowerment education reaches beyond pure economic aspirations, okay, toward more humane, okay, and in this way, possibly truly universal ways of being in this world. Okay. So ethically, empowerment education promises simply to encourage learners to be independent from social or cultural impositions and restrictions. Okay. And pragmatically, this education can also encourage indirectly, but very significantly, more sustainable relation to the environment through restrictions on unwanted births. Okay. So next to human rights education, animal rights education is emerging. So this is also to give equal amount of attention to the non-human species, okay, which should also be given equal importance, if we are to push for sustainable development. So animal rights education in the works of Harmstamp in 2018 explored into how the ethical treatment and status of animals influence, believe it or not, pedagogy, teaching, and learning in general through existing forms of environmental education, humane or post-humanist education, eco-pedagogy, critical animal pedagogy, and critical animal studies. So now we talk about ecocentric education. So what then is an ecocentric education? This is based on eco-philosophical principles having its foundations in land ethics, deep ecology, social ecology, ecofeminism, experiential education, deep ecology, ethics underlying biological conservation and or animal rights and welfare, post-humanism and post-colonialism, and other types of pedagogies closely related to the ones we have discussed earlier. Okay, so in a larger context, ecocentric education promises to bring realization of moral wrongs, okay, inflicted by one species upon all others. Okay, this will also bring us a vision of hope. Okay, as we push for honest to goodness sustainability or sustainable development in the world. So hope lies in humanity's coming to realize the immensity of what we are irretrievably losing. Remember that the resources that we have been wasting all this time are non-renewable resources, which means that we cannot bring back what have we lost as a result of degradation, as a result of the abuse and the misuse of all these resources. So while there is time, while there is chance for us to reverse the situation and to avert the negative or the negative impacts of climate change, let's try to contribute to the best of our ability in the work of climate change adaptation measures. So hope lies in the fact that we are native to the earth. We have the potential of understanding what we are losing our own family. So this is a far cry from the 17 SDGs that emphasize sustainable use and sustainable industrialization, at the same time perpetuating an anthropocentric, meaning when we talk about anthropocentric, by the way, it's people-centered, and profit-driven paradigm. So by contrast to the ESDGs, ecocentric education fosters wonder of empathy towards nature. The issues of food security and the basic needs of human beings, and for that matter, non-human beings, are deemed quintessential, as all lives matter in an ecocentric thought. So alternatives to neoliberal capitalist or industrial socialist or communist systems have been proposed by several critical economists and social economists. Obviously, there are always pros and the cons to the different models that we introduce. And these models include the concepts of degrowth, steady state economy, or the plateau type of development, and circular economy. So where the growth, okay, is regarded as the involuntary transition towards a just, participatory, and ecologically sustainable society. Okay, and it proposes a framework based on ends and means, and a set of biophysical and social indicators derived from a steady state economy, considering the capacity of the planet to provide resources. So, and particularly variables including population and consumption growth. Again, it's variable to population. Remember that we have already around almost 10 billion and growing at an exponential rate. Okay? And of course, the Malthusian law tells us that the population grows faster than the food supply, which is why in most parts of the globe, food security or scarcity of food has become one of the more alarming social problems, because the rate of increase of population, okay, is not proportionate, okay, to the growth of the food supply. So the growth rate does not, okay, is not commensurate, okay, to the rate of growth of population. So O'Neill in 2012 proposes a framework, okay, as mentioned, and where a set of biophysical and social indicators are derived from a steady state economy. So we also talk about indigenous and traditional education. Indigenous knowledge, okay, is that which is continuous with and derived from ecosystemic awareness. And can also be an alternative, actually, okay, to the so-called traditional intergenerational learning, okay, which includes passing on stories and legends, from old to young, stories that embody existential questions without explicit moralizing. So the explicit prioritization of Western ideas over those of traditional societies is unfashionable in the post-colonial world. Yet traditional ecological knowledge is considered if it contributes to corporate or industrial interests. Okay. So then we have also basic literacy and numeracy education as also given highlight in Islamic education, okay, where the lack of basic human rights and even basic education providing basic literacy or numerical skills leads to situations where girls are taken out of schools and forced to give birth after childhood marriage or even after rape. That's one of the many, that's one of the dark sides of the African region, okay? Even in South Africa, okay, South America, I should say, okay, when it comes to equality between male and female individuals. So some basic education and policy that helps to maintain human dignity and rights, even though it can be seen as Western, can be seen as good. One of the challenges is how to combine Western values with culturally variable ones. Again, we're talking about multiculturalism. So we can also make the most out of the Western values or the Western education as we infuse Eastern thought, in order for it to be more relevant to our present situation in this part of the world. So indigenous families may be making well-reasoned decisions about how to maintain their traditions while still accessing some of the positive returns of basic literacy and numeracy schooling. Remember, one of the more important, one of the more significant things we have in relation to goal number 4 is the promotion of culture. And this, in a way, would promote what we call as global citizenship. Local is a portmanteau word now combining the words global and local, meaning as we assume our role as global citizens, so we cannot afford to lose uh, of our foothold, in the local, in our yeah, of course, uh, in our home country. Okay, so that's global citizenship. So these basic academic skills and competencies are arithmetic, health, governance, and land rights. Okay, so such lessons can be conducted in a way that integrates existing culture and new skill development, perhaps involving parents or members of extended families, not to disrupt respect for elders. Remember that the critical role played by different groups or stakeholders. That's why I had it part of your critical analysis, comparing the different types of or models of alternative schools and looking into what will uh, will uh, uh, address, okay, the relevant needs of certain sectors. Okay, so let me just, okay, in summary, have it for some sort of summation by presenting to you the matrix, okay, of what I have discussed earlier. Okay, on the first column is the identification of the type of education, and on the second is the main applications, and the last is the origin of this model. Okay, so critical pedagogy, eco-literacy, and eco-pedagogy all uh, are under one classification, which had its origin from different models. Okay, that's why we have eco on one hand and literacy on the other. Eco, ecology, and pedagogy, that's education and ecology. Okay, so it's all about education for the environment, education for sustainability, eco-centric education, meaning it's an ecologically centered education, ecocentric. Okay, eco-literacy, meaning literacy all about ecology and ecological citizenship. Okay, that's how we sum it up for our discussion about critical pedagogy, eco-literacy, and eco-pedagogy. Next, we have emancipation and empowerment education. This is springing from the Western thought, okay? And its application are education for human rights, that is to include reproductive rights, family planning, sex, health education, education for minority rights, but we prefer it to be termed as indigenous people's right rather than minority rights, because minority seems to be derogatory. So we'd rather have it on a more euphemistically sounding term as indigenous people's rights. Then education for animal rights. We also have ecocentric education, okay, which was pointed out as an application of the types of education. And but for this part of the discussion, it is regarded as a type of education which is also springing from different models and origins. It is all about deep ecology education. We have education stressing intrinsic values. Okay, education for wonder, empathy education. Okay, then we have education for alternative economic models. This is a Western model. Okay, it is all about education for degrowth, education for steady state economy, education for cradle to cradle, and circular economy. Okay. Now, for indigenous and traditional education, obviously the origin is traditional or indigenous. It's all about local learning, exemplified by ancestral forms of knowledge and attitude to transfer. It's holistic, it's total worldview education. Okay. And then we have, lastly, basic literacy and numeracy education. It's also mixed for its origin, and it's most of the existing UNESCO and development NGO sponsored programs. So here are the references, and we will now proceed to the open forum. Should there be any questions relative to this discussion? Meantime, I thank you all for your time listening to this lecture. Have a great day. Okay, so any questions for now? I just like to end the recording.